special meeting for the 2016 budget. So let's get started.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thanks for taking the time to hear what we have to say about our budget.
Nope.
I'm
Nope.
sorry.
I'm sorry. Just getting an early start there.
Oh, okay. We have highlighted what we think is important that you know. Apparently, they've handed you the detail sheets. And as we go, if you have any questions about the details, I think I have those sheets with me as well. And maybe I can answer those, or even at a later date if you have questions about the details. But in my presentation, I've highlighted all the high points of the budget, but more importantly, how we plan on utilizing that money and the direction that we're going to go with the money. So with that said, before I get started, I want to just take a second to thank Kristen Elin, the administrative assistant in our office, and Major Dennis Kramer. They were very instrumental in helping me get this thing put together. This is something that we take very seriously. We put a lot of hours into this presentation, and we hope that you find it informative and educational. So with that said, on the first slide, I tried to include a picture. It's kind of hard to see, of the U.S. Bank building. So hopefully that is in our future. I've contacted Klinger and Associates. They're supposed to have me a proposal yet this week so we can start our due diligence on the building.
Awesome.
And I've also had some conversations with James Estes as well, and got some information on what our next step is to move towards the actual design and concept of the building. So there's a picture of the U.S. Bank building that hopefully in the near future will be the Burlington Police Department. So thanks for your support on that.
Amen.
So this is an overview. I'm going to talk about the overall budget, the overall expenditures, and our overall revenues in the budget. And our staffing levels, what they were, what they are, and what they're going to be, and how we utilize those. I know in the past we've kind of talked about this, but we have a new council member, and it doesn't hurt to refresh how we lay out the Burlington Police Department and how the organization and the chain of command works and how we get done what we need to get done. Our police operations and what all that consists of, our capital items that we're going to request this year, and some operational enhancement. And this is going to go towards not only what we've done for outreach programs, but what we're currently doing, and then what we think would be important in the future. So overall, our police budget, City Manager Furneaux sent that to me yet this week for gross general fund expenditures to the point of $5.63 million. Then of that $5.63 million, we have patrol operations at $4.04, administration at $720,940, and keep in mind that is including our clerks and our janitorial staff. That comes under police administration, not the patrol division. And our contribution to DESCOM, and as we go through and we get into charts and graphs, I'll explain to you kind of how that's changed a little bit when you look at our contributions, our revenues, and our expenditures, because it did kind of change the way that flows through the police department. Animal control at $113,000. Just briefly, without getting into the details of that, that also includes all the expenses at the animal shelter. I mean, what we have to pay to run the animal shelter and the part-time help at the animal shelter to clean the animal shelter, all the euthanization of the cats, dogs, and the overall animal control program. I don't want you to think because there's one person assigned to this that it's anywhere near that amount. It goes into far more detail than that. The task force at $121,700. And again, since we are the host agency of the task force, that all comes into the task force and then it's redistributed. So with the personnel that are in the task force, as we get the grant money and then money that the county pays for their personnel and the money West Burlington pays for part-time and the money we pay for full-time. So again, that is the whole operational picture of the task force. And then parking enforcement at $44,000. And again, that includes the personnel, but at the same time it includes a vehicle that they use, maintenance of the vehicle, the supply of like tickets that they write, and everything that it takes to run the parking enforcement program. And so, and I got this broke down a little bit more in detail in a kind of a spreadsheet organizational chart, but just to kind of give you an idea of where we were with our staffing levels. And in FY15, we had 41 total sworn officers, and that includes 10 command officers. At that time, we did not have an evidence technician, 1 part-time parking, 1 part-time animal control, and 3 records clerks. And in 16, you'll see that it stays pretty much the same, other than we've added 2 reserve officers. We've added a part-time evidence tech. And then in 17, that 43, and I'll get into that in detail, but those are the 2 COPS grants. And those are the 2 employees that will be funded 75% by the federal government and 25% by us.
Chief, reserve officers do not get paid, is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. But they are part of our staffing. And we just, I'll get you just a quick update on that. The other 2 have passed everything, and they're starting their module trainings this month. So that's encouraging. Here in a couple months, we'll have them in uniform for a total of 4. So then I put it in a little bit more of a chart and a graph that it's a little bit easier to read, so you don't get all caught up in the narrative part of that. And it kind of just lays it out where the personnel are in the organization. And just briefly, police operations. Again, this is just kind of an overview of how the department runs, but we have 10 command officers, myself, 2 majors, 3 lieutenants, and 4 sergeants. And Major Dennis Kramer is the major of operations. And operations in the Burlington Police Department is basically everything that the patrol division and the task force. Everything that those 2 divisions do, Major Kramer is in charge of that. And then Major Grimshaw is in charge of our administrative services, which is everything else, all of our outreach programs, our crime prevention programs, our SROs at the middle school, Pieces after school program. All the outreach things we do and the community policing efforts we do, that's what Major Grimshaw is responsible for. And we have 2 12-hour shifts, and don't confuse squads with shifts. The 2 shifts consist of 4 squads, an A, B, C, and D squad. The shifts are 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. for a day shift and a night shift. And we have 1 lieutenant per shift and 1 sergeant per squad. And what that does for us, it guarantees us a shift commander to be on duty at all times. We do not ever, and that's a powerful word, but it's the truth, we do not ever work without a command officer on duty at the Burlington Police Department. If for some reason a sergeant would call in, we'll get another sergeant or a lieutenant to cover the shift, or one of the majors, and if that doesn't happen, it'll be myself. We don't run the Burlington Police Department without a shift commander on duty. And criminal investigations consist of a lieutenant and 3 detectives. And in the past, it's been 4 detectives. We had to remove a detective to put it on one of our squads, and I'll kind of show that to you. But we're getting close to being in a position that we're going to have an operational decision to make. I mean, do we move somebody back to CID, which I think is probably the direction we're headed, or we can utilize this person for some other things in addition to our POP unit, and I'll explain that. And the task force consists of 1 detective from the BPD, 1 from Des Moines County, and West Burlington was always full-time in the task force, and then unfortunately when Chief Newberry had his incident, they had to pull their person to get their staffing where they needed it. Well, now that they're kind of stabilized again, we've been fortunate. At least we're going to pick one up part-time, it looks like, for at least 6 months of the year, and then hopefully when we put in for the grant to reapply, that maybe we can get West Burlington back there full-time. And then we have 2 full-time SROs. And we'll talk about in detail with those SROs how they're funded and what they do. So here's the organizational chart, and hopefully you can see that and read that. But that's how it starts to fall out, and it's color-coded for the new people. Because what I wanted to do, I wanted to make sure we got them plugged in over here, but that's not double. I mean, obviously we don't have 2 of those, but these are the 4 officers that we currently have in uniform, graduated from the academy, certified, that are going through the field training program. And as you look over here, where we've plugged those in, like there's errands. This would have been a vacancy. We've been running this shift with 5 officers. And then so we look over here, and we've plugged them in over here as well, in here. And here's the position that I'm referring to that could possibly fill this vacant position. And then these 2 officers are currently at the academy. They're scheduled to graduate from the academy in April. hopefully be out on the streets by July or August. But in the meantime, we have every intention of assigning 2 officers to the POP unit. I think we can make that work while they're in training. I mean, we got the grant, and the grant was based on problem-oriented policing. And I'll get into that again in a little bit more detail, but just to kind of give you a little prep for that, we have a plan for these 2 officers and what we're going to utilize their services for. But I think we can go ahead and get that program started prior to these 2 officers getting completely out of the FTO program. It's interesting that the government, the grant actually started September 1st of 15. And they'll give you what we'll have to do on the back end of this in 3 years is apply for a 6-month extension, because there's no way that you get the grant money one day and you start your program the next. Because they understand, the government understands that you have to hire people, you have to train people, those people have to be in place before you can start your program. And that's what happened last time when we had the COPS grant, that on the backside we'll ask for a 6-month extension, and it won't be a problem as long as we can justify it, which we can.
Good, Chief, just for my information, do the 6 officers on Squad A, are they always on Squad A, or do they just move around from B to C to D, or is it always the same?
That's a great question, and thanks for that clarification. Once a year, they bid shifts, and then they bid the line on their shift. And by seniority, that's all handed out, and they will remain on that squad for that year. Now, if somebody voluntarily wanted to move and somebody else agreed to move, we wouldn't have a problem with that. But what we like is we learn from the fire industry that if we can keep these guys, the same guys, working together for extended periods of time, that's extremely important. And that's why the fire industry works 24-hour shifts. It's extremely important that when those guys fight a fire, that they train together, they fight fires together. Well, for us in a critical incident, we train together. We sure want to have that incident with the same people. So as an example, Squad A, if they're off on a Monday, Tuesday, Squad B would work Monday, Tuesday. And then Squad A would come in and work Wednesday, Thursday. Squad B would be off. And then Squad A would be off Friday, Saturday, Sunday. B would work. So every week that just changes. It flip-flops. I mean, if you're off Monday, Tuesday, you work Wednesday, Thursday, you're off Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But then the following week's just the opposite. The only days off you're going to have is Wednesday and Thursday. And in there are some 8-hour days mixed into the schedule. I don't know if we need to get into all that detail to balance the 80 hours in 2 weeks, but that's basically how the shift works. And no, we try to maintain those same personnel and the same squads for those reasons.
It sure makes sense.
Yeah, and not to say it couldn't change, but for the very most part, that Squad A's probably been intact now for about 3 or 4 years. So, yeah, that's really important, and it's a great question. Thank you. So here's just kind of a quick look at our gross general fund expenditures. And the first one we're looking at is our actual expenditures in FY14 and then FY15. And the reason you see that reduction is Officer Wyatt retired. We had 2 officers leave to go to other departments and 2 other scheduled retirements. I mean, instead of working with 41 officers that we budgeted for, we were working with 37 officers. Wow. And we talked about that in times of, if you go back to that 2011, 2012, when we were going through such tough budget times, and we talked about at the police department, when you lose those positions, we just can't go out. It's not like Case can run out and hire a welder. We're a year away from putting these people back in place, depending on what time of the year these people vacate. So then in FY16, you can see what was approved, and then again, what was anticipated, where we're at so far in FY16. And again, that's just because we're just now getting back up to staff. And then what we're proposing in FY17. And the reason you see a little bit more of a jump there than you normally would is because of the COPS grant. I mean, it still goes in the budget as an expenditure, but we're going to get, over a period of 3 years, $250,000 of those dollars back. I mean, that's the bottom line. The grant is budgeted differently. Our contribution, even though it's a 75-25, as you go through the budget worksheets in the grant process, we have to increase our percentage each year. Now, they don't say how much, but we do have to increase it. Like if the first year, if we're 25%, then the second year we're 28%, and the third year we're 30%. But when it's all said and done, they're going to give us over, of course, of 3 years, $250,000. And here's our gross general fund revenues. And again, it's all, grant dollars are big in this, because if you look at proposed 17, that's the reason you see that jump in revenue. And it's because those grant dollars from the COPS grant is flowing in. It was pretty flat across here, and then in an FY14, and that was towards the end of a grant cycle as well. So, I mean, the biggest difference in most of those revenues, and in 14, something else that really affected that was the comm center. That's when we switched over from running the whole comm center that you see an expenditure of $850,000 versus now just our contribution. Because even though we were taking in those contributions, we had to show those expenditures, even though it didn't actually come from the city of Burlington, if that makes sense. And that was to the tune of about $200,000 in FY14. So again, this is just a little different way of looking at it. I think around 78% in that neighborhood, 80% of our budget is personnel expenses. So I think it's important that we break those out and we look at those personnel expenses and what's driving the cost. And the bottom line is we look across step increases and healthcare increases. I mean, that's just, those percentages are just staying right in line with what we're trying to do. But that gives you an idea of what was approved in 16 and what we've budgeted in 17 and how those numbers are going to run out when it's all said and done. And as a placeholder, I mean, we talked about this, we're still in negotiations, and so I don't think anybody knows exactly where that's going to end up, but Mr. Furneaux and the attorney's done a lot of research, and it seems like about 2.4 is kind of what's been going, and I think the fire was 2.25, 2.26, somewhere in that neighborhood. So as a placeholder, that's just what's been built into the budget for now, and that's, hopefully it'll be awful close to where it ends up, or that would be my assumption. So our full-time overtime, and you'll remember back in 2015, not only were we short all that personnel, but that's when we were having a lot of incidents or a lot of things going on up in the South Hill neighborhood. And as a department, we were directed to do our best to get that under control. And so at that point, we just started hiring 2 guys a day for about 6 hours a day in the evening hours to work up there in that area. And I think it had a drastic effect on that, but it cost us. There's no doubt about it. If when it comes, without the COPS grant and without staffing at current levels, any little thing that you have to go try to fix is going to cost you a lot of money. But with that said, we budgeted in 16 $95,000, and to date we're 56.9. So I mean, we're on track to be pretty close to spending that. What's going to help, and it's going to be real close towards the end of the budget, but as these guys that are in the field training program get out and they fill those holes in those squads I showed you, that'll eliminate most of this. Because what happens is if you're running a squad of 5 guys, which we were running 2 5s and 2 6s on our squads, somebody takes vacation by contract, we have to approve it, now you got 4, and somebody calls in sick that day. Or any little thing, we have to assign somebody to go do a presentation, or then that lowers us to 3. And we cannot keep up with calls for service with 3 people. We don't work with 3 people. We hire overtime to get that 4th person back on the street. So again, when you're at bare bones minimum, any little thing really creates you a problem. So with that said, and talking to Mr. Furneaux, I said, well, in 17, I mean, knock on wood, but if things go like we're planning them to go, I would like to try to reduce that and budget an $85,000 figure to get us back more in line with where we should be. And I figured it up, we're going to spend about $50,000 to $52,000 in overtime before we have to fill these shifts. And what I mean by that is we have court time, and we have training, and we have in-service training. We have X number of hours every year that has to be filled with overtime.
So are you saying pretty much just the average year is going to be 50,000?
Yeah, I'd say that safely. I mean, court time by contract, if they get called in to go to court, it's a minimum of 2 hours. If we have any critical incident and I have to call somebody in, it's a minimum of 3 hours. And we go to the range 4 or 5 times a year, and they have, right now we got about 12 hours of in-service training coming up that we have to do every year. And when you put all that together, you come up with a baseline of overtime. And that's about where it's at, or awful close. And so then what's in addition to that would be, like I said, these things that come up that are out of our control and that we have to staff the streets. And included in that, keep in mind, is all the call-outs for the Criminal Investigation Division as well. And so, I mean, that happens maybe more often than any of us would like it to happen. But when we need, investigators, we need them. And there's again, to try to give you a little bit better visual of what that looks like, what those overtime hours, or dollars I should say, look like. And so you can see what we budgeted in 16 and where we're at in date at 16, and then what we've proposed in 17. And that proposed number in 17 becomes pretty close to what was budgeted in 16. It's instead of 95, it's 85. And that'll certainly be a goal of the organization to make that number. I mean, as you go through the details in your sheets of patrol investigation and all the other services that are listed there, some of those, let's say like utilities, we have to plug in an annual, let's say 2% increase. Or in like vehicle repair, some of those things you just have to plan for inflation or increases. Well then, as a manager, you get done with that and you look and go, well, I'm trying to keep this budget in check, and I don't really want all these detail numbers to be any more than what they've been, but at the same time, you have to be realistic. And so when we got done with all those 2% increases, I looked at our overtime, and that's where we're at. And if we can hold that and budget that at 85 and hold it there, that $10,000 will take care of all of our incremental increases we had everywhere else. And so when you're done with the detail portion doesn't go up. So that's what we're trying to accomplish with that. And so this is a graph of our traffic safety grant funding. And the traffic safety grant, what we utilize those dollars for, that's a state program. It's funded by the federal government, and then the state, what I want to say, the state puts the money out to us, and they're the ones that actually run the program and keep track that we're doing what we say we're going to do. And so you can see over the years, it's like everything else. You know, the grant dollars are going down. We used to get a little over 16,000, and it just went down. And this year it actually came back up 1,000. We went from 11,000 back to 12,000. And how we utilize those dollars is strictly for traffic enforcement. Because when you're working the streets with 4 guys, they don't have time. If you see a patrol car out there working seatbelt enforcement or running radar, I can almost guarantee you he's under traffic safety dollars. And again, these are overtime dollars that are expended out of the budget, but they're reimbursed at 100%. And in Annette, trust me, she follows that like a hawk, and we get her down to about $75 range, and I get a phone call that the program's over for the year, so God bless her. She keeps us on track, to say the least. But that's how those dollars are utilized, 100% strictly for OWI enforcement, speed enforcement, and seatbelt enforcement. And one of our major priorities with that program is our school zones. That's a major priority for us. If you're going to work, if you sign up to work daytime on the traffic safety grant, you are without a doubt going to spend some time in the school zones. Security guard overtime. Again, this is an expenditure out of the budget, but it's a pass-through. This is 100% reimbursed by the schools or by venue works or by steamboat days. If we're working off-duty overtime at the Burlington Police Department, that's being reimbursed by somebody. We do not allow a Burlington police officer to work at a tavern or at Hy-Vee. We get these requests all the time, hey, can you have an officer come out? We'd like to hire him for the weekend. We don't do that. We absolutely, I don't think it puts us in the right light. I think they're there without supervision. I think there's work comp issues. Most places do it. And it's attractive to the officers because it's a moneymaker for them. But at the same time, I think as we look in the best interest of this community, it's not in our best interest to do that. You know, they're worked hard enough the way it is, and then to be moonlighting on the side, I don't think it's good business. And it's kind of been that way for the last 10 or 12 years, and I'd sure like to keep it that way. But yet we have community events or civic events that want our help, and I do think that's what we're there for. An example, a high school football game. They want a minimum of 5 officers at every home football game. And they pay us our overtime rate plus a little so we can add to a work comp fund. And it's no different than steamboat days. It's important, extremely important that we're down there. I mean, we've reduced incidents down there almost, knock on wood, to the point that they're non-existent, which is fantastic in comparison to what it was. But that doesn't come without a cost. So when you look at these, at security guard overtime, we've kind of been flat right there. And the reason you see a little bit of an increase there, I mean, actually that's only about a $1,200 or $1,400 increase. It looks bigger than that. And that was, again, the school. They used to, at one point they said, well, 3 guys is enough. Well, 4 guys is enough. And like I said, now we're up to 5. So as you see that number in the budget, I mean, $11,000 for traffic safety and another $38,000. I mean, you're approaching $49,000 or $50,000 in overtime. It might show up, or you see it as an expenditure, but it's 100% reimbursed. So it's important that you understand that. So let's talk about capital, our capital items, what we're requesting this year. And this is pretty consistent every year, other than every other year we try to get 3 marked cars instead of 2. And later on in the presentation, some of our cost concerns, I'll talk to you a little bit about maybe the long-term effect of that, and someday in the near future thinking about maybe going back to seeing if we couldn't get 3 marked cars a year. I don't think we're in a position to do that right now. I'm not asking for that. We can stay on the 3 and 2, but eventually there might be a little bit of price to pay for that. But anyway, for now, I mean, for next year, what we're going to ask you for is 2 brand new squad cars, and that's real close to the state bid price. We just bid out 2 cars, and they were right at $27,000 a piece. So we figure in a percentage increase. I think that number will be real close. And we talked about this when we were talking about the new police facility and keeping the vehicles inside, and I told you that the equipment, believe it or not, is about 2/3 of the cost of the car. And that's about what it comes out to be. That electronic equipment in those cars is extremely expensive. So to keep that equipment updated, we like to replace the equipment when we replace the car. And so that's, you can kind of see that includes our molded seats, the L3 system, which is the video system. That's the in-car video system, not the body camera, but the in-car. The in-car computer, the printer, the scanner, and the partitions are what divides us between the patrol officers and any prisoners that might be in back. It also includes all the mounting hardware, which is the gun locks that are up front, the consoles for the radios, the sirens. All those things are included in that hardware. And then the emergency lighting that comes with what they call a serial controller would be included in that emergency lighting.
What's the time frame or mileage? What's the criteria for replacing vehicles?
Great question, and that's when we get to our cost concerns, that's the perfect question, because normally, in a very briefly, if a Crown Vic got around that 85 to 100,000, it started to become very costly. It was differentials, it was transmissions, the things that cost you a lot of money. Well, I just completed it this week, and the 2 Explorers we bought in 2012 now have right at 100,000 miles. And knock on wood, they're just sewing along like the day we bought them. And so that's how I think to date we've gotten by with 3.2, 3.2, 3.2 instead of 3s across the board. And it'll be interesting to see as we go forward, you know, they might do this for another year. We might start to get, let's say, 125, 150 out of them, which would be wonderful. I mean, we never, ever even come close to those numbers with the old Crown Vic squad car. Not even close.
Really?
Yeah.
Are there cars specifically designed for police use?
Yes. Yeah, they're called police interceptors, and Ford is, well, Dodge is still making a few police package vehicles, but for the most part, Ford has completely cornered the market. And they have police package vehicles. I mean, the engine's the same, but the transmissions are different, the suspensions are different, the frames are different. So, yeah, there's a lot that goes into them. But unbelievable because we're in the government. I mean, we're buying these brand new Ford Explorers, like I said, for around $27,000 with these extras, if you will. Well, go price one if you want one. And it's probably closer to $50,000.
When it comes to the equipment, though, so the equipment's only good for about 3 years?
Yeah, 5. It's going to be 5 to 6. That's our rotation, 5 to 6. And those computers are like any other computer. You know, they just, in 4 or 5 years, you definitely start to have issues with them. You start to have issues with the scanners. And then what happens with the L3, it's a proprietary software that you use at the police department that downloads these and that tracks those videos. Well, as those systems become upgraded, the DVRs in the car as well need to be upgraded. And that's the expensive piece. The cameras themselves, like that little picture of that camera, they're $600 or $700, but that DVR in the glove box is about $3,200 or $3,300. But that's really the brains or the key to this system working. So, I mean, if you don't keep that equipment updated, it'll nickel and dime you too. And the last thing you need is a critical incident and your DVR failing, or your camera failing, or a gun lock in the car failing. Or now just the day-to-day frustrations of trying to run this driver's license. They do all that from the car now, or run the registration check, or try to look up a picture of somebody, or hook into the closed-circuit camera system at the high school. You know, all those things, if they're not functioning properly, become very difficult to deal with when you have learned to count on those. So,
Before we move on, what happens to the old vehicles and equipment?
the old vehicles get moved to Public Works or to Eric's division, or they're reused within the city. And actually, they're reused for several years before they then go out and Steve Homebrucker, our Public Works Director, has found a website, and after all that use is done, they sell them on a governmental website. But he's had success at getting some pretty good money out of them, what's left of them. And then Rich, I don't know how exactly they reuse the computers, but they redistribute those throughout the city too. You'll see those tough books around. I know the fire department's had some of them in the past. And so we try to redistribute that as best we can throughout the city. Great question, thank you. Oops, we didn't even go over that slide. And this is just a continuation for a total of $117,000. We got about once every 3 years, we try to plug a CID vehicle in at $15,000 as a placeholder, because we'll trade that vehicle. That vehicle won't go back into service. We'll take one of our older CID, which actually we got some that are early 2000s. But they just don't get the same wear and tear that a squad car gets, and they last a long time. But at the same time, we need to keep that fleet somewhat. And we won't, I don't think in my time we have ever bought a new vehicle for CID. We'll go find something that's 2 or 3 years old that doesn't have a lot of miles on it and try to get by with that. So to keep in mind, we're not out buying brand new vehicles. It doesn't work that way other than our patrol fleet. So here's the COPS grant, and we've kind of already touched on this, but just in general terms, that's kind of how it's going to break out. It's going to be a total of $250,000 for 2 officers over a period of 3 years, and when you divide that out, it's about $83,333 that it'll actually add to the general fund. But more importantly is that question, is how are we going to use these federal funded resources? And this is a big deal. I mean, we've tried and tried to get a COPS grant. We got it again, and so here's what we're going to do with the money. We're going to form a problem-oriented policing unit. And if you go to the Department of Justice website, this is something that the Department of Justice has put together a program for these problem-oriented policing units, and they've done tons and tons of research and what works and what doesn't work. And as I read through and looked at all these different models, we decided that this is the model to have, and here's why. I mean, we're going to take these 2 officers, and they're going to work a flexible schedule. They're not going to be scheduled to one of those shifts that you saw. It needs to be extremely flexible because crime, and when we get into this part over here, this changes all the time. This time and place changes all the time. So they're going to be flexible. And by contract, we have the right to do that. If they sign up and they volunteer for the program, they're going to be flexible employees. So we're going to assign them to high crime areas. And what we want them to do is get in there and build trust and rapport. Because as we get into this problem triangle, we have to have cooperation. Oops. We have to have cooperation for that to work. Hey, Eric? Oh. But anyway, when it comes back up, it'll help me explain it. But the triangle, we try to look at that as like a three-legged stool, if you will. And if we can just remove one leg of that stool, I think we can prevent something very serious from happening. And when he pulls that back up, I'll show you how this triangle goes about doing that.
That's a nice shot. There it is.
There, she's back. So the first thing you need to do is identify the problem. What's the problem? And we currently have software in the organization. It's a program called Command Central. Major Grimshaw touched on it a little bit during the work session, but we can go in there and we can pattern this. And it'll put it in Google Maps for us and overlay and kind of start to show us hot spots. And so we can start to make a prediction that if it's happened before, it'll happen again. So we'll use that software to help identify this problem. And once we identify the problem, we'll look at the place. Where is the place? What's happening? I mean, is it a housing unit? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, maybe it's a playground. Maybe it's a parking lot somewhere. Whatever that is, we'll identify that as time and place. And that becomes crucial because then let's say it's at a business owner's parking lot. You get those business owners involved. Going, hey, do you think you could put us up some security lights? Do you think you could maybe install a camera system? Could you start to do some of these things to help us with this place that we think is a matter of time and we're going to have one of these serious crimes? And so we have likely offenders, suitable targets that come together, time and space. And in the absence of any of these, we're hoping we can prevent that crime. And so as the model progresses, you get over here, the offender, the handler. I mean, what can we be doing with, let's say, probation, parole? What can we be doing with the halfway house? I mean, are there things that we could be doing, that this POP unit could be doing to figure out where these offenders are? And currently, what's their status? I mean, how many offenders are they, and where are they going in the community? And start to identify the offenders. And then we want to look at the target victim. I mean, think about how important that statement is. If you could build a rapport in the neighborhood, and you hear through the grapevine that, hey, these two guys got it in for, these two, we'll call them figures B and C, got it in for A. And we find that out. Well, we go to A and go, guess what? You got a problem. And here's why you got a problem. And I don't want you to be confused when it says guardian over here. We're not going to be following people around. That's not what that means. But what it means is that we can put this person on notice and then hopefully find somebody that is a friend, a family member, and put them on notice as well. To do everything we can to protect this potential victim. And if you can remove any one of those three things, the theory is that it won't happen. And so this is an extremely new concept for us. There's a lot of models out there, and the only way we can do this is to be able to assign two people that this is what you're going to do, and this is how you're going to do it. And we're going to set up reporting, measurements, standards, scorecards, if you will. Is it working, isn't it working? And really try to fulfill what the government's asking us to do. And it's worked in other areas. I mean, I don't know if it's worked with just two people. You know, a lot of other areas have several of these units. But with that said, it is going to give us an opportunity to proactive police. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal. When you just react, you're spinning your wheels. So
These two officers come from where? I mean,
they'll come from those squads. And then those guys you saw over there to the left, we'll plug those holes in. So we still have 6s on those squads,
okay.
but yet we got these guys.
Thank you.
And they will be volunteers, but we got plenty of them, and they'll be hand-selected. And we know the organization and we know the personality that we're looking for to try to fill these two positions, no different than an SRO. I mean, those positions as well take a special person that have kids in mind, and it's just a different concept in policing. So any other questions on the pop unit? I know that's a nutshell, but at the same time, it's a new concept, and I'm really excited about trying it, to seeing how it'll work. I flipped it, Eric. I don't know if it's going to go or not.
Well, speaking of needing a new computer.
It's not necessarily the computer, it's communications between stuff.
There we go. So operational enhancements. And these are our outreach programs, our SRO programs. And the first one I want to talk about a little bit is the middle school SRO program. And our SROs, to start with, are funded by the school. And I'll clarify that. Our high school SRO is funded wages and benefits 100% of the time for the contracted days, which is about 9 months. And the middle school SRO is funded wages and benefits at 45%. So we end up at about 72.5% funding for both positions. And with that said, across the state, you see some cities that are 50%, you see some that are 75%. So I think we're way on the upper end of that, and I think the school has been more than fair in recognizing that they have a need and that we have a need, and they're helping not only position us in the schools, but helping to fund that as well. So with that said, let's talk about the middle school SRO a little bit. We're doing the same thing in the middle school we'd kind of like to do with the pop unit in terms of we got different ideas or a different model for policing. If a patrol officer gets called to a middle school, here's what's going to happen, and it's going to happen in about 10 minutes. Well, we had a fight. Well, who hit who? Well, you started it. Here's your ticket. We notify parents. They're separated. We're out the door because we got 4 more calls waiting. Well, that really didn't solve a whole lot. Yeah, it sent somebody down to juvenile court, but what did it do to keep it from happening again? And so that's what the middle school SRO, and he has done an incredible job to build rapport in those 2 schools. I mean, he's got kids coming to him now that are talking to him about things going on in their homes that we never dreamt would ever happen. He started a diversionary program. In other words, you two just got in a fight. You're going to have to volunteer for this, but I'm willing to come in here on my own time on a Saturday and sit down with your parent and figure out what caused this. What was the problem? And yeah, you're going to have to do a little detention over here, and you're going to be held accountable, but we're going to solve the problem. We're not going to give you a ticket. If you volunteer for this and you want to be part of solving this problem, we're not going to give you a ticket. And I think those are the things that community police departments do. And we're trying to solve the problem long term instead of just running in, dealing with it, and running back out. He has established flag football programs. He comes in on his own time to run those programs on a Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon. Doesn't get any better than that.
Who's your middle school?
Officer Stern. Officer John Stern. He was the head football coach at Danville, I might add, for 5 or 6 years. He finally relinquished that this year. But that's what we use the middle school SRO for. And the high school SRO is very similar, just on a little different level. I mean, out there he has far more students, less time. But with that said, the program is going to be to take Officer Stern and move with these kids. As these kids graduate from middle school, he's going to go to the high school with them. That's our biggest problem, is that transition, that 8th to 9th grade, and they're having to deal with all these other things, let alone a new policeman. And so that's the thought. Let's deal with these kids. Once we start in the middle school, we're going to move you to the high school, and by then the guy at the high school has been there 4 years, which is plenty. He can go back to patrol. We'll fill somebody in to go back to the middle schools and just kind of keep the rotation going. Or that's the new model. That's our thought. And to close on that with the SROs, when I talk about the right personnel for those positions, and we interviewed, had several officers that thought that'd be a great job. Well, Officer Stern come in, and my first question to him was, well, what's your mission? What's your thought? What's your goal of this program? And he looked me right in the eye and he said, Chief, my goal is that every one of these kids walk across that stage. What more could be said?
Amen.
What more could be said? So kudos to him, and that's kind of where we're at with our SRO. We've talked a lot about the Pieces After School program, really bought into that. We're working, or I'm personally working with a group for some neighborhood revitalization ideas. Our Shop with a Cop, Midwest Magic, that's coming up. Our Safe Trick or Treat. We started about a year and a half ago, we've started a minority recruitment committee, Major Grimstraw's in charge of. It's going really well. We got a couple minority high school students that are giving us some great ideas.
Awesome.
We've engaged with a gentleman's club here in Burlington for ideas. The NAACP is part of this group, so we're actively engaged in trying to recruit minorities. I've been in touch with McCleary, I can't pronounce his last name, but he's an associate professor, a doctor at WIU who's going to be presenting down at the Martin Luther King. I've been in contact with him. He's lined me up with some minority interns that think they might want a chance. So, I mean, all those things are going on that we're going to seriously try to. We've always tried to recruit, but nothing's worked. And so, well, it's time, let's just try something different. Let's actually go to them and see what we can get. So that's where we're at. It's been a ton of time, a commitment, but we really think it's a program that'll work. We've already talked about the reserves. Kind of proud of these guys. We got the Honor Guard program going again. They did a presentation down at the high school football game at the new stadium. It was wonderful. We had them in the Steamboat Days parade this year. They did an opening at the FBI National Academy Conference, so all that's going really well. And I thought this was important to talk just briefly about the community support. I mean, we talk about the money that the taxpayers pour into the police department, but at the same time, with outreach efforts that I think are becoming effective, I think these are some of the results of those activities that we participated in.
The 50,000 for the reserve program is
Yeah.
phenomenal.
And that was unbelievable.
That blew me away.
You know, it was 6 or 8 months and 4,500 every year for Shop with a Cop, 25,000. I had an individual come into the organization and wrote me a check, a personal check for $25,000 for vests and AEDs. We now have AEDs in every squad car and on every floor of the building. Safe Trick or Treat, the contributions we get for that. I mean, our voter approval. Annually, we get around $15,000 in private donations to the foundation at the police department. And we're going to have a PowerPoint coming up in the near future when the budget season's over. We've had a pledge for some individuals that would like to get a K-9 program started again. I'm all good with that, but they need to understand that you're not only going to have the expense of the dog and the equipment, but the overtime. And I've made it very clear that that's not going to be funded through the budget. If we can come up with the money and the community wants one, then absolutely. I don't have a problem with that, but we currently don't have that kind of money in the city budget. So, but it's very, very active. I've received a lot of phone calls, and we got a PowerPoint put together, and we'll come present that to the council. I just thought it was important we talk about that. There is a pledge sitting out there, and we'll see where that goes.
How much do you anticipate that would cost?
I've figured that at around $75,000 for 7.5 to 8 years, the life of the dog, and that would be the dog, the training, the equipment, and the overtime. We used to pay 4 hours of overtime per 14-day work cycle, but there's actually been some case law come out in that in the Fair Labor Standard Act, and that's closer to 6 or 8 hours per pay period. So we figured it at 8 hours a pay period to cover those overtime costs, and it's in that neighborhood of $75,000 to $80,000 for a 7 or 8 year program.
All right.
Yeah, we get a lot of support, faith-based support for our chaplain program in the terms of not only volunteer hours, hundreds and hundreds of those, but also they make a financial commitment to that program as well. So thanks, Burlington. Thank you. And again, we've kind of already touched on this, but it's just something that we need to consider. As we move forward, it's getting more and more expensive to hire, to train, to equip officers. Is there anything we can do about that? You know, I think our retention for the most part is really pretty good. It's pretty sound. Most people that come here stay here, just not all of them, but most of them. But it's getting really expensive. I mean, and the academy costs now, just the academy alone, to send them to the academy and to feed them. And I'm not talking about equipment, I'm not talking about personnel costs, travel costs. It's about $7,600, $7,800 per student or per selectee, whatever, recruit, whatever you want to call them. And so those costs continue to rise. And even with that said, Judy Bradshaw, the new director, just sent me a letter about a week ago, said, we need another $125 per recruit for certification costs. And I thought, well, what's the other $7,200 for? But anyway, those, just in the back of your mind, I want you to understand that that's a big cost driver to the organization.
And the officer's being paid while he's at the.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and I excluded that from that 72. I think the last contract to Jim are about 19.7, 19.8. We have them sign a contract. It's a 4-year contract. I mean, once they commit to the Burlington Police Department, if they leave, the first year would be 100%, then 80%, 60, 40, 20. So I think that number was like 19.8, and that would include travel time, personnel costs, and cost of the training. Structural safety for the current facility, I mean, right now, we're still hanging in there. Everything is what it is, but it's something that needs to be on the back of our mind. I mean, we're still going to be there for, maybe up to 2 years, 2.5 years. So this, again, it's nothing crucial right now, but keep it in the back of your mind. It's something that we need to be mindful of and to consider. And we already pretty much talked about the 5-year patrol fleet rotation. I mean, we have basically 14 marked cars. Not basically, we have 14 marked cars, and we have a travel car that we use. And so if you were to replace 3 a year, that keeps those cars on that 5-year rotation. Well, since 2012, we've gotten away from that. We've went 3-2, 3-2, 3-2. But with that said, I'm kind of encouraged by the 2012 models that are hanging in there and doing fine. But again, it's just something I want you to consider, to keep in the back of your mind. If we start to have failures, maybe it's something that we address in the future. For now, I'm not asking for that. It's just a consideration. And with that said, I hope that this overview is going to give you a little better understanding of how your public dollars are spent. And at the department, and this is so true, we do take great pride in making Burlington a great place to live, work, and play.
And thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
So, questions or comments?
Chief, I understand everything that you're doing, the department's doing, and I think you're doing overall a wonderful job, fabulous job, and you're very conscientious about the budget. I think the community is expecting more from us, and not necessarily your department. I hear quite often complaints about the way people drive and the way people use our streets and parking, and the property between the street and the private property. And I would like to know if at all possible, between you and the development and the city manager, if we could come up with a cost to help reduce some of these problem areas that we're having. I know I drive through the downtown in the evening hours, and the number of vehicles that are backed into stalls on the street, the numbers are incredible. And that's a safety hazard. I see the same thing on the public streets, even on minor arterials where parking is allowed, people parking on the wrong side of the street. And I've had a couple of scares myself, but I also see a lot of people running red lights and stop signs, and I'm not even slowing down for them. I mean, I don't know if the accident rate reflects that or not, but and with all that you said about if we're going to see enforcement on of traffic laws on the streets, generally going to be through grant programs, I would like to know what it would take for us to be able to enforce that on a more on a daily basis, and realistic figures. I'm not afraid of what the answer's gonna be. I'm afraid of how we're going to
Sure.
be able to accomplish it.
Sure. I think with that said, to add to that, we've worked with four basically on a squad for about 2.5 years now. And knock on wood, but what I presented, if that holds true, if I can get 6 people on a squad, we can start to do more of that proactively. We won't need 100% grant funding to work traffic. We can assign somebody daily to traffic if those numbers hold up for us. We can do that. As far as the right-of-way, again, that's maybe a mentality change for us that's going to take time, and that we need those resources. I got to have those 5 or 6 guys, because you're going to see in my annual report, we're at 44,000 calls for service. And every day, you walk into that comm center at any time, and there's calls stacked. And what that means is that somebody's waiting for a policeman. And I know what you're getting at as far as, well, does it take extra parking enforcement, or what does it take? I mean, I think that's a discussion this council has to have. I'm not in a position to present to you something that is going to cost, I mean, current parking in your detailed budget sheet, you're going to see is about $44,300, and that's for a part-time, 28 hours a week. But you got to remember that there's vehicles involved, there's equipment involved, there's vehicle maintenance involved, gasoline involved, all those things. And so, I mean, with that said, that would obviously be a help, but it's difficult for me to come to you and ask for that when we've all been a huge part of trying to get this budget in line, to try to do what's working. I mean, Councilman Fleming asked a very specific question last week. He said, Mr. Furneaux, are our deficit accounts going down? Yes, they are. Are our general fund balance increasing? Yes, it is. Thank you. We're on track. And I am extremely mindful of that. And I understand there's a very, very important balance there, and I'm very conscious about your emails, and the things that you send to me I take extremely seriously. But with that said, we have been in a position that it's been difficult to do those things. But come June or July, when our squads are fully staffed, I don't have a bit of problem assigning somebody back to traffic enforcement. Today, Officer A, you're working traffic, and that's what I want you to do today. And will that make a difference? Absolutely. Absolutely. But with that in mind, our seatbelt compliance is 98.9%. But it doesn't take, what I'm saying though is we write less seatbelt tickets now than we've ever written. What it's going to take is a citywide effort in education, that this has become extremely important to this current council. And you got to remember, I think this is driving part of it, Councilman Scott, is we got 2,500 people in town that don't live here, and they have no intentions of living here, and kind of are going to go on about their way.
That's my fear.
And that'll make a difference as well.
That's my fear, is that the people that live here are going to see the attitudes
Sure.
and the responsibility that they don't have to this community, and then they're going to create a habit that they're not going to break because they see others doing it and it not being
Absolutely.
enforced. I know the timing sucks, is what it does, and maybe it will go away on its own, but the other part of that, the use of the right of way is not so much the folks that are here on a temporary basis, but it's long-term residents.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think with that said, when you look at a community that's made up of 33% rentals, and they're all full right now, look at how much on-street parking has been taken up that normally isn't taken up. I mean, as some of this pressure is relieved, and as some of this, it's going to also free up some spaces that aren't there. And so, with that said, I am absolutely mindful of that, and we will make a conscious effort to make a difference. And I'll be back to you here in just a few weeks with our Zone 2 report. I mean, I gave you a Zone 5 report. She's been reassigned. She's continuing those efforts in Zone 2. And then maybe that's not on a quick enough pace, and I understand that, but with what we have, we've been mindful of those requests.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not being at all critical.
No, I understand.
You've gotten after it and you're addressing it. I'm going to keep it in front of the public, and I think a way of addressing it is knowing what it would take to address it.
Sure, and one other quick comment before we leave that, and this is again going to have to be up to this council and something that when you have time to address it, But your concern of backing into stalls, they removed that from the Iowa code. That's no longer against the law. And so, I mean, if, I'm not saying you can't make a city ordinance in certain places, whether you want to do that or you don't, but again, that is a council decision. But currently, there is not an ordinance against backing into one of those stalls.
What about parking on the wrong side of the?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and we will address that. No question.
I don't like your budget. Can you cut it in half?
Yeah,
What do you say? You're gonna be in for a lot of trouble.
yeah.
Hey, I just wanna throw out there, this has nothing to do with budget, but just that, you look around and you see some of the things that are going on nationally and issues that are taking place with police officers and that sort of thing, and I'd just like to say that I'm grateful to the Lord and to the police department. I think we had a good year, so I'm hoping, I'm looking forward to, if 2016 can be as good as 2015 in that arena, I don't think we'd have too many complaints in this area of the woods, so just want to throw that out there.
Well, thank you very much, and we truly understand what it means to have your support and the community support. Without that, we have zero effectiveness. So, I mean, thank you, and I'm very sincere about that.
Thank you.
Looking forward to the pop squad.
Yeah, so am I. Thank you.
I just want to add, that department page, that has police on the top, that has not been updated, so if you kind of want to put an X on it.
What's
All
that?
the detail sheets behind it are updated with the correct numbers, but this, department police, this sheet is not updated. So, yeah.
It's not.
It's not updated, no, with the correct numbers, so, just to let you know, we can get you an updated sheet, but all the detailed sheets are what is in the proposed budget.
Okay, thanks.
These numbers get pulled up and they just haven't been double checked yet, so.
Thank you.
And also, just, Councilman Scott, we did just post today on Channel 18 some parking, no parking, there's about 5 bullet points. You know, no parking in the right-of-way, no parking over a driveway. So we're starting to get that out there, and if anybody sees it, just
deal.
to,
Excellent.
so.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay,
City manager, do you have comments about police department budget or?
No, not really. I
Okay.
mean, if you look at the budget and what you're looking at for costs, personnel is 80%.
80%, yeah.
And out of the contractual, which is a major other component of that, 570,000 of that is the comm center. I mean, you don't have, there aren't very many variables in here. I mean, if you're gonna have, your level of cost is directly influenced by how much you wanna have for staff, what you wanna have for staffing.
Right.
wastewater, I guess, yeah, wastewater treatment, Mr. Finney?
That was good. How much time did you allot him?
35 minutes. I don't know.
They can talk about this page for 35 minutes.
Wastewater treatment facility. That's, of course, an aerial photograph of the plant. That area right there is the new addition that was finished in December of 2012. It's a set of primary settling tanks. From 82 till 2012, we did not have those tanks there. There was a lift station that was installed here, and we also changed the digester from an aerobic digester to an anaerobic digester. And as I said, those improvements were finished in about December of 2012. Everything was functioning, and that project was about $6.13 million, I believe.
How's that working out? I mean, what's your
Well,
thoughts
it's
on-
reduced, I think, our energy usage by probably somewhere around 15 to 20% from where we are now. So it's helped us there. Another thing that's helped us, I think, and will continue to help us as the city continues its sewer separation project that has an impact on us during dry weather. So our flows are going down during dry weather periods, but with the rain events, we still see a maximum or near maximum flow rate coming into the plant. So we still have an infiltration, we still have a problem, we have,
Are we always gonna have an infiltration problem?
well, I guess it depends on how much money you spend to take care of the infiltration.
All right, all right, slow down.
Next slide.
Guaranteed. We will always have
What's the matter with
infiltration.
Unavoidable.
The next one is, again, about the span of responsibilities at the wastewater treatment plant. Through the plant, we operate and we maintain the treatment plant. Our budget does that. We operate and we maintain 15 lift stations throughout the city. 3 of them we refer to as our major lift stations. The other ones are what we would consider small, minor residential lift stations. There might be as few as 9 homes or as many as 120 homes on it. It just depends upon its location relative in the collection system. We also monitor and manage the operation of the equalization tanks. 2 tanks were built within the Hawkeye sanitary sewer system. It seems kind of strange that you'd have to have equalization tank in a newly separated sewer system, but the outlying neighborhoods, many of them have the original piping that's still there. Certainly all the homes have their original household services coming out there. Very old system, and so there are still leaks in the existing neighborhoods that feed to those brand new pipes that were installed as part of the separation system. And there's still sump pumps and things like that that are in the system. And so when the ground is saturated and or when you get a rain event, we still see our flow rates coming to this, through the collection system to the Market Street lift station, which is the large lift station on the south side of the auditorium. It has a limited capacity of up to about 10,000 gallons per minute. So these equalization tanks are about halfway back in the collection system. There's a throttle chamber on several main sewers coming past that equalization tank. And the purpose of those throttling chambers is to control the total flow from that outer portion of the collection system, making it to the lift station. So you save space for the area of the community close to the lift station, and then you control the flow from the outer portions so the total flow does not exceed the capacity of the lift station. Because if you exceed the capacity of the lift station, the system starts to flood. In a separated sewer system, there's no overflow point except it goes back to people's basements. And that would be in the downtown area.
And are these equalization tanks working like they're supposed to, like the money we paid for them?
They are. They're giving us a lot of water after the fact. What happens to the throttle chambers is they direct water to the equalization tanks and hold it. Now they have limited capacity. One's like 660,000 gallons and the other one's 1 million gallons. And once they get full, they'll actually overflow. And again, it seems kind of odd, a newly separated sewer system, how come you're bypassing from your system? It's because your outlying areas have some very, very old sewers, which is something the city may have to address in the future. And there will be more equalization tanks built. I think there'll probably be one incorporated in the Cascade Sewer Separation Project that's ongoing right now. And then when they do the Mazzle, the central core of the city, there will also, I'm sure, be some equalization tank or tanks associated with that system. Well, excuse me, we also do the laboratory. We have a laboratory at the plant. We do a lot of sampling inside the plant to comply with our NPDES permit requirements. And we do the analysis. Some of the analysis we send off-site, we're unable to do. We also do the industrial pre-treatment program. We currently have 70 industries that are participating in that program. We issue a permit to them for basically wastewater discharge permit, which sets standards as far as, in some cases, maybe a maximum flow, but typically it's pertaining to certain pollutants that they may have in their wastewater that they're releasing to the collection system. And they regularly self-monitor. They submit the reports, and we go out 3 times a year typically to do surveillance sampling, collect our own samples, analyze it, and compare it to the results they've been submitting to us to see if they're compare well. And we also have the byproduct of wastewater treatment, the biosolids, and we dewater those biosolids at the plant, and then we land apply them at agricultural ground in the outer community.
Do we still use that building to store them in?
Rutherford, yes, we still are using that
That
facility.
still
for
works
storage.
well, does it?
Yes.
It does, okay.
Wastewater treatment facility, the revenue, we get basically all our money, for the most part, from the sewer fees that appear on the residents' water bill. Next slide. Our expenditures, what do we do with that money, other than the span of responsibilities that I was talking about, or in addition to? In the budget, the 400 series, basically our personnel cost. The wastewater facility or treatment facility has basically two budgets. One is for the administration, which has the prefix 5401, and the other subset is the facility itself and maintenance and operation of the plant, and that's prefix 5402. In the administration, that budget contains two full-time positions, myself and my office coordinator. The facility contains wage benefits and so on and so forth for 14 full-time people currently working there, plus one part-time. I do have an open full-time position that has not been filled, that's still being held as a place for a person to be added.
And so is there somebody there 24 hours a day?
It is a 24-hour, 7-day operation at the wastewater plant. We always have at least one person on duty. The contractual services portion of the budget is the 500 series. I just included in your handout some specific line items that go along with 5401, the administration portion. 529, if you looked at that number, that is pertaining to the billing services that the Waterworks does for us, and we pay them that amount of money out of the wastewater fund to handle the billing that occurs on the water bill. 581 is a fee that we actually pay to West Burlington, because there are a few properties within the city limits that actually are flowing their discharge from their homes to West Burlington, and we get billed on a regular basis for those services. 5402, the plant operation and maintenance, specifically line item 511. We rebudgeted $25,000 that we had in the current budget that's intended to do a nutrient study. There's some rules and regulations coming down through the pipe. We'll be seeing those shortly. And we still have not received our MPDS draft permit from the state. We submitted it back in March of 2013. The permit actually was set to expire in September of 2013. They've had our application all this time, and they're just getting to the point now, 2016, to issue that draft permit. So what will happen is we'll probably see the permit in the next 5-6 work days. Be given an opportunity to review it, plant staff personnel. We can return comments. Then they'll take it and they'll adjust it accordingly if they think it's appropriate. Then they'll send it to us for public notice, be posted. I think the public will have up to 45 days to make comments, and then using any comments that they might receive, that might delay the issuance of the permit, but normally they don't get any comments. And so we should probably see a new permit issued around April, I'm guessing, by April. And in that permit, it will require us to do a nutrient study in the first 2 years. And that's to look at what can be done, what we are capable of now, and what can be done in the future to reduce the total nitrogen that's in our plant effluent and also the total phosphorus.
How long is that permit good for?
They're typically 5-year permits. So that 2-year study, or that study within the first 2 years, we'll submit the findings of that report. The state will look at it and determine what they feel is the appropriate direction that we need to go to implement the necessary technology to reduce the total nitrogen, the total phosphorus. It's intended to address the hypoxia zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And they're doing this up and down all the rivers with the wastewater plants as they issue new permits.
There's a lot that goes into this part, and and I guess this is probably part of the reason why, I mean, DNR has delayed pretty much everybody's permits over the last couple of years in dealing with nitrates and phosphates. And they don't have a real firm solution on what they're gonna look at on the backside or mandate on communities.
So they're winging this?
Well, they know that they have mandates that are forced on them from the federal level, and they have to get it addressed. They're just not sure what the mechanism will be or how far to go that will be acceptable, that will be something that's acceptable at the EPA level. So as they're going through this, one of the things that's happened, I think that, I don't know if you've all received or seen in some of the information you've gotten from the League of Cities, they have a grant to start to work on a trading program, a nutrient trading program. Some of that will be looking at what are some things that we can look at to do some trade-offs within more of the rural areas. I mean, that's where the majority of the nitrates and phosphates are coming from, is from farming.
Right.
But where the DNR has been able to have a mechanism where they can do some things to reduce is at the point source or the communities level.
Permitted
So
facilities.
we're going to have to take on mandated expenses. We're looking at what are some ways that we can work on to do either reductions in other communities that's more affordable than what it is in our own community. What are some possible projects we can do in the rural areas where we're spending money to improve ag land, essentially, and the water runoff quality from ag land that's cheaper than what we might have to do with our own facility. But they don't have a good mechanism in place. That's something that the DNR is working on. Again, the League of Cities has some staff time and some grant funds that have been awarded to them to help put together a program there. There's another part of this too that came through, if you watch the State of the Union from Governor Branstad this last week, and I know I'm taking up your time. He had one of the things that he talked about was an extension on the schools sales tax formula. And part of that was to create a mechanism to try to figure out a way to fund some of these nitrate and phosphate issues. And, you know, part of it is that I don't know that that's the magic solution to make things happen, but he's trying to figure out a way to come up with a source of funds to help with a statewide issue that's being mandated on us from the federal government in a way that provides some alternatives to having all of this come through communities. And so depending on where that conversation goes during the course of this year, there are some potential benefits that may come out of that discussion at a community level for this specific issue.
That kind of benefit, or?
Yes, that kind of benefit. I don't remember the dollar amounts that were talked about, but I think it's in the $1 billion amount type range that he's looking on a statewide basis for funds that would be available between now and 2042 with that extension. But how that all plays out with over this, I mean, there's no telling how that's going to play out this legislative cycle, but that is a huge issue, and it plays into what's going to come for Don's area out of that NPDES permit as they have to submit those results. 2-3 years down the road, they're going to be starting to tell communities what they're mandated to do, and we're hopeful to have some, whether it's through the trading program that the league has been working on, or through possibly this funding source, some ways to help to fund what the improvements may be that we're going to see a few years down the road from this issue.
Be in the millions you're talking about.
Depending on the standard that they are putting on our community, that could be up to the $20 million range, depending on how restrictive they were.
Where's the mandate on the farmers? I mean,
Well,
with the chemicals.
but
that
what's
they
the
use?
mechanism that you're going to do to make that happen, and where are you going to get the political support to make that happen?
Hey,
would
why are you
probably
asking
be
me
the
those
other
questions?
thing.
Put me on the spot, Jim.
But that's a difficult issue. It is a very difficult issue, and
Those are hard questions somebody has to ask and answer.
so as Don's talking about his NPDES permit and where this comes on the backside, there's a lot going on at a statewide level that we don't have good solid answers on yet.
Wastewater, always exciting.
Okay.
It's good to have
As I
perspective.
said,
Perspective.
511 actually for the current fiscal year was adjusted downward because we weren't gonna spend the $25,000, and it's been moved to the upcoming fiscal year to correspond with basically the issuance of the MPDS permit. 573 is another line item in the 5402 budget. That's up significantly, and that's because we're going to be replacing a number of personnel doors on our buildings. They were still steel doors, steel frameworks, and they're rusted pretty bad in some of the areas where we have water passing from point A to point B. 579 is another line item that has $50,000 in it for us to basically hire a contractor. And again, this is a contractual service, 500 series. So the 500 series, that work would be done by somebody else, same as the doors, and of course, same as the nutrient study. So that's some of the reasons for some numbers changing significantly in the line items. Under commodities, it's the 600 series. Oh, next slide. Here, okay. 600 series. 622 is a line item where we have a lot of money being spent. And that's basically pertaining to the chemicals. We use chemicals in the collection system to control fats, oils, and greases. That's what fog is. Okay. And also odor treatment, trying to keep odor control. I know that there are odors that occur at Market Street Lift Station Riverfront area periodically. We do try to control that as best we can by chemicals, not only there, masking agents, but we also put chemicals in at Silver Street Lift Station. That's quite a long force main, and the water has a tendency to go septic. We try to do what we can to prevent that from happening using chemicals. We also have dewatering chemicals for handling the biosolids. We have chemicals we use for disinfection of the final effluent. We also have lab chemicals that we use. I did skip over I think it's 543 in the 500 series. That's where the electric power is. It's kind of self-explanatory. As I said, that number is less because of what we did with the anaerobic digester than what it would be at this time if we hadn't done that. The anaerobic digestion process is a lot less of an energy user than if we were doing aerobic digestion. So,
Somewhere in the back of my mind, we had, wasn't there a few years ago, something about an alternative source of energy that we had to put in to the plant to make sure there was a backup system?
oh, well, we had a choice between, we had the second power supply that we had to the plant did not meet state standards. We had two power sources coming out of the same substation,
that's
different
what it was.
breakers.
Yeah.
And we were required to find a different second source because it was happening too often. Once to twice a year, we were losing both power sources out of that same substation, and we were on total bypass. So we looked at a standalone, a complete plant emergency generator versus bringing in a power supply from another substation, which is down South Burlington substation. That's probably been about 5-6 years. I've got it on my calendar, but I think it's about 5 or 6 years ago that change was made. I was really skeptical about bringing it in from the south because I thought, look at all the transmission line between here and there, and the increased likelihood we would lose that second power source. We have not had an instance since we made that change of having both power sources off to the plant. So it's worked out very well for us. And in the meantime, I think Alliant replaced or redid the substation at 4th Street, which is where our primary source comes in from. Next slide. The wastewater treatment facility capital improvement projects, some of them are in the budget as far as like in the 500 series, 600 series, and then some of them are in the 700 series. But for concrete roadway repairs, we put in 31.5, and that's kind of a reoccurring project. We've got a lot of concrete down there. Some of the plant was built in 1959, some of it was built in 82, some of it was built, of course, here more recently in 2012. And then, of course, there's the roadway itself. And so we just decided we have to start putting some money in and start doing some small projects on the concrete here and there to try to stay up with it. A Ranger pickup, we have 22.5 in there. Night manure spreader, that's for the biosolids program. The air scrubber, that's a big item. We're hoping we don't have to spend that money. I believe all the items that you see in the improvement projects is to be paid from sewer funds with the exception of that air scrubber. When we did our improvements in 2012, we talked about odors, but we did not set any money aside and we did not put any money into providing any kind of system to deal with odors because we did not know for sure where they were going to be a problem, and we didn't want to spend money on something that we didn't know that we were going to have. We have not spent any money on odors other than the chemicals that I mentioned earlier. As far as dealing with anything on the plant site, one of the capital items we are doing right now that should be finished hopefully by the end of this calendar month is the improvements for the ventilation, heating ventilation in the belt filter press room where we dewater the solids. That air will soon be vented much, much better than what it currently has been doing since 1982. And there's the potential for odors being an issue outside of the building. The engineers don't think that will be the case, but if it is, it does happen and we have to deal with it, then an air scrubber is a device that will scrub the air before it actually gets vented to the outside. And $500,000 is what it would cost to put that system in.
This is built into the sewer budget. It's not in his operating costs, what you're looking at here. The two different mechanisms for the projects that aren't in his operating costs to cover, we still have some cash left over from when the 2012 plant was done, from what was bonded at that point. I think that you might have bonded enough to cover for building a new location for the biosolids. I'm not sure if that was the purpose for why it was so much higher, but you do have a significant amount there. If we do end up doing this air scrubber unit, it would be paid for out of that that capital that's still sitting on hand. It's within the sewer fund, but it's not part of your operating revenues. It's a separate account.
The system should go online by the end of the calendar month, as I said, and we don't know. The engineers do not believe it'll be an issue, but we do, we are prepared, or at least have considered what would be involved and what the cost would be, and that's the dollar amount that they gave us.
Is that there's no other a way to attack that? I mean, that would be the next step, is having to do the air scrubber?
Yes. And that, again, would be from the south end of the plant where the digester and the dewatering portion of our process is located. There's still, if you look at the capital improvement table that goes out to 2021 or something like that, out at the far end, there is also another $475,000 for an air scrubber. That was identified in a study we had as a significant potential for the north end of the plant. As the city continues to separate sewers, the flow coming into the plant will begin to be even more of a potential source of odors than what it is now. I mentioned Market Street with the long force main from Silver Street Lift Station out by Case Corporation all the way down to Market Street, that closed pipe. That's an odor source, and we're trying to deal with that with chemicals, but we also can expect to have problems from the other portions of the collection system as separation continues. We have seen, due to the separations that have been occurring, we've seen the dry weather flow into the plant drop probably 1.5 million to 2 million gallons a day during a dry weather period from what it was before we started the Hawkeye sewer separation.
That's quite a change, yeah.
Now, when it rains, because part of the system's still combined, and plus we have this old neighborhoods feeding into even the newly separated Hawkeye, we do see high flow rates coming into the plant. And when water goes in those equalization tanks, that peak flow continues because the system's been designed to feed and drain those tanks as quickly as possible to create more storage space for the next storm. And so when there's room at the lift station to put it to the plant, those tanks start to release water into the last half of the sewer collection system going to the lift station. And so our peak flow in the lift station stays elevated because we've got this stored water and we got to get it out of there for the next storm event. And as time goes on, we're going to be putting more equalization tanks, and they're going to be doing the same thing, as opposed to in the old days It used to go over a cofferdam and out to the river through a combined sewer overflow. Now we're holding that water and we're bringing it in to treat it. So low flow days, really, really good. Wet weather, the flow is really up there and it stays elevated for a longer period of time than what it used to, because we are required to treat sanitary sewer flow. On the capital improvement list, we also have a half-ton pickup, the electric golf cart. We buy used reconditioned golf carts. We buy one and trade in the old one towards the cost, and we have 3 of those. We use them we get replacement for 1 cart every other year, so basically we have them for 6 years. And we use those not to play golf, but we use it to go from north to south and south to north. The plant's over 900 feet, the frontage is 900 feet, so the guys use it to go back and forth as far as projects and working on maintenance things and so on and so forth. We used to walk it and carry stuff, or we used to use pickup trucks, start them up, drive them up there, and then just drive it back and forth for 900 feet. And somebody came up with the idea for a golf cart. Emergency power generator is pertaining to one of those 12 minor lift stations. We want to put a standalone emergency generator at that lift station. It's got quite a few places on it. It also does not have an overflow, as some of our other minor lift stations do have. And we just feel that we need to start looking at some of our minors, which we are looking at least 3 stations to try to put standalone emergency generators there. So this would be the first of 3. Next slide. Wastewater treatment facility, significant issues now, the N and the future F. As we've talked about already, the plant effluent nutrient reduction, it's now and in the future we'll see something with the NPDES permit, and of course, depending on what comes out of that study and what the state is able to figure out, that will dictate, you know, how much money we're talking about, how far out in the future. My understanding is if you're tied up spending a lot of money on wastewater related issues already, such as separation, that may, the state will consider moving the compliance with the total nitrogen, total phosphorus back a ways.
Current administration is willing to work with us as long as we keep on doing the 3% annual increases and proactively working on the combined sewer separation. They will let us work the nitrate and phosphate removal into a long-term CIP plan that incorporates it within those other expenditures that we're doing. Now, I think it still remains to be seen what happens if there's a push to have nitrate and phosphate sooner than CSOs. I mean, CSO has been an order that's been out there since mid-1980s that we're still working on compliance.
Right.
The other big thing will be what happens as you have administration change occur both at the governor level and then with his departmental executive staff. Those things can, their willingness to cooperate with us, even though it's there now, 5-10 years from now, there's no guarantees.
You said mid-'80s on the sewer separation? I thought that was '90s.
EPA.
Sewer studies were being done in the mid to...
I want to say it was '86 that the EPA came out with the first CSO order that in their
The city's
regs.
done several studies.
We started in '99
You were in
with
grade
our
school then.
our portion of the process.
She wasn't born yet.
Well, that was after they did all these sewer studies. So, I mean, there's been a lot looked at over the years as far as getting out there doing monitoring and developing hydraulic models and so on and so forth. So, and the current consent order or consent agreement, I think it takes us out to like
2028 or 20, I think it's 2028.
2028. So will we have to do nitrogen, total phosphorus removal before then? I don't know. I think it depends on what the study comes up with. If it's a relatively easy or minor fix, maybe we have equipment there that will allow us to accomplish part of the goal. And, well, but if we do, it would probably be a big energy user.
Yeah.
And so then our energy bill can go up dramatically now. Is that what they're gonna tell us to do because the equipment's already there, or what? I don't know. And we won't know until the study's done. Odors, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you had within, I think in your reader file, the last piece of related to the CSO that got filed with the state. The Mazel, the construction on that, their tentative cost estimate now on that is $32.5 million. That's just for the Mazel separation. There's still 2 equalization basins to be built on top of that. Those are still very preliminary numbers coming out of what we had done from RJN. As Ryan gets to look at that down in the engineering, they'll start putting a little bit more refined cost estimates to that, but that's a little bit higher than what we had in previous budgets or estimates for what that work would cost.
How costly are the equalization tanks, right? I mean,
Depends on the sizing. I mean, I don't know.
I'm gonna guess that the equalization tank for the Mazel section, that's gonna require some very sizable tanks.
Millions.
The largest ones
It's
we have is a
millions.
1 million right now, and that was in the Hawkeye. I think that you're gonna see something at least as comparable, if not larger. in the
I
Hawkeye.
want to say the last one we built was somewhere in the 2.5 million or something like that is
I-
what's
yeah.
sticking out, but
I think it was between 2.5 and maybe like 3.1 million for those 2 tanks.
goodness gracious.
Okay, the odors we've already talked about. As I said, that's gonna be something that, the south plant will be the most immediate issue, and the north part of the plant, as time goes on, it could become an issue for us. Flood mitigation, the wastewater treatment facility, that's the Market Street lift station, which is in the early phases of the city's flood mitigation plan. The site facilities, the plant site facilities, that should be plant site facilities. I don't think that they're getting down to our area, if they ever do get down there, until like 2024, 2025 right now is the plan, I believe. So we've got a number of years to deal with that. As far as the funding mechanisms, I guess, I don't know if that's up in the air or not, but
No,
if
it's
it's
in
been
place.
settled, for sure.
it's in place.
It is,
I mean,
okay.
we may see that schedule for
Change.
what they provide to us for funds get pushed out a little bit, but it'll still be there.
I think it's
Unless they
gonna,
make another change.
I think it's supposed to take 2 or 3 years, a couple of phases to get Market Street completely protected. I think the HESCOs are still gonna be involved after even the first phase and so on and so forth. The available storage for biosolids, again, whether that's now or in the future, if for some reason our agreement with the owner of the building were to come to an end, then we would have to do something different than what we're currently doing. And thus far, that hasn't happened.
That was estimated at 1.1 million.
Yeah,
That
in an older
is-
study.
For
It's
the
it's
storage?
probably about
It's an
1
older
point,
study.
I'm guessing 1.3 right now.
Yeah, to build a new storage facility, you need to have to find a place to locate it. And I'm not even sure, though, that would incorporate the size requirements you now have, because they're a little bit different than they were when that original study was done.
Well,
don't
the
know who else would
facility
want that
has
building.
increased capacity back in 2012 with the improvement. And so if we had a user come into the community who utilized that space or a significant portion of that space, we're going to have more biosolids to deal with than we do now. And at that time, we definitely, even if we still had the Rutherford building, we wouldn't have enough storage for the material we'd be generating. So whether we bring in a new user or whether something happens with our lease agreement, the need for biosolid storage is probably there in the future.
Have we
We
tried
just
to
don't
buy
know
the
it.
building?
No, we haven't.
I
They
have
still-
asked personally, one-on-one, with the person I deal with, and he went back and talked with the owner, and they said they didn't have any interest. Now, that was probably a couple of years ago.
I can't see who else would have any interest in that building, for one.
Well, he has, they do use that facility for other purposes besides this,
Yeah.
so.
Okay, next slide. So anyway, the wastewater treatment facility proposed increase in sewer fee, as I understand it, is 3%. So, you want to talk about, let's go into solid waste if you don't mind. I'd like to get done. Okay, solid waste. That slide shows that solid waste entails garbage and recycling. So I'll go to the next slide, please. Okay, what is our trash basic service? We have the weekly collection of one 33-gallon container, of household trash, not to weigh more than 50 pounds. Also paid for the trash basic services, we do the 7-week program in the fall for bagged leaves. We do the 3-week in the spring. We do the citywide cleanup program. And we also do the free disposal. We allow free disposal of self-hauled wood waste with proof of paying the trash fee. Okay, next slide. As I said, we also provide recycling services. We don't do it ourselves. We contract with the Des Moines County area recyclers. They provide curbside collection only every 2 weeks in the city of Burlington. They have that 24/7 drop-off operation at a processing facility. They have sales of the recyclables. They have education services. They have household hazardous chemical program, a facility that's located at the landfill. So the trash fee that's paid, oh, go to the next slide. The trash fee that's paid on the water bill covers both the trash basic program that I described as well as the recycling services that are provided by contract from Des Moines County area recyclers. We have an estimate of about 9,650 customers, plus or minus. So our revenue comes from the biggest share of the revenue comes from a trash fee that we collect. We also get revenue from the trash tags. The retailers, the stores come into the city hall and they purchase the tags from the city counter for $1.95 each. Most of the stores turn around and sell them for $2 a piece to the individual homeowners. Some places more or less than $2. We also, according in the budget document, there's something in there about dumpster permits. These are the containers that get parked out in right of way that the waste haulers rent out to the public. Maybe a 20-yard container, maybe a 10-car, one of those rolled off containers, so that they're sitting out there, if they're in public right of way, they're required to have a permit to do that. And that's the fees that's in the city's website. Next slide. So, the solid waste fee, or the trash fee that's on the water bill, that's the lion's share of the money we collect for our program. The proposed increase is 25 cents on the trash or the basic service for the garbage collection, the leaf collection, the citywide cleanup, the people taking wood waste out. And then we're increasing the recycling services, or I should say the commission is
part of it.
Increasing it by 10 cents
We're-
per household per month, so that's why we're also incorporating that in there.
That 25-cent proposed fee increase includes that 10-cent recycling, passing on that 10 cents.
Oh, it
So
does?
15 is true, okay.
Yes.
Well, I'm
15
sorry, I
cents
didn't
is
know
for the rest
that.
of it. Yep.
That's good news. I mean,
Well, yeah,
yeah.
that makes my next charts all
Way to be
wrong.
positive. Way to be
Next
positive.
slide. That doesn't do me any good. People complain about the waste fee, solid waste fee. Trash is too much in the city of Burlington. This is intended to show what's been going on with the trash fee. In July 1st of 2012, it was basically the fee that appeared on the water bill was the $12.10. And of that $12.10, the citizens were paying $8.95 for the basic trash service, and they were we were paying to the recycling center for their recycling services $3.15. So you add that up, and that's where we came with the $12.10. And then there was a mid-year adjustment in October of 2012. Just 3 months later, it was bumped up by $1. And that's an unusual occurrence, but that's what we did because of the status of our fund. The recycling fee was, of course, still staying the same. And so then you add that up and you came up with $13 on the water bill. And then July 1st, the normal raise time, 7/13/2013, there was a pass-through from the recycling, but we didn't change the fee appearing on the water bill. So actually, you could say that the trash fee actually went down by 10 cents when we raised this and did not raise that. July 1st, 2014, it went from $9.75 to $9.90 and $3.25 to $3.35 to $13.25. Then it went to $13.50, and well, this is the one that's wrong. So I guess it's, instead of being $13.85, it's $13.75. Is that right? 10 cents lower. So $13.75 is what we're proposing. Next slide. Again, this is wrong, but trash basic service would be $10.30 a month. And the recycling services, actually, this would probably be, in other words, this would be $10.20 a month. This would be the $3.55 per month, and you'd come up with $13.75 instead. Now, I don't know what the water bills look like for everybody. Some people may get a monthly bill because they're metered. Some people might get a quarterly bill. I think most residences get a quarterly bill. So 3 months times this figure, this would be 41, 14?
15.
15? Oh, okay. Next slide. People see that $41 and they think, man, that's just really expensive, which I understand that, but that's comprised of both trash and the recycling fee that we have to pay. Now, another major source of our revenue right now is the tag program. And I think you're all familiar with that. If you have a container, one additional container beyond the 33, and I don't care if it's a 20-gallon can, 20-gallon bag, 13-gallon bag, it requires a trash tag if it's out beyond the 33 quote-unquote free container. That's the history of the price tag, or the price of the trash tag. I think when we were at a previous meeting, you said 10 years from the time here to here, which basically was 9 years. Yeah, so right now we're at $2 as of July 1st of 2014, and I don't believe that we're recommending any change there with that. So next slide. People may or may not realize that you can use the tag for other purposes. We have the citywide cleanup program, which program-approved items can be set out and picked up for free during the program, but outside the program, we don't pick it up for free anymore. But you can still get rid of it if you're willing to pay for it. And so here's a table that we have. We show that for one tag, you get these types of items, 2 tags, 3 tags. This group from 5 tags up for the hide-a-bed, these are things that we would pick up on a regular basis with your garbage. So that information is in our annual newsletter. It's on the city's website. We send it out in the, we also advertise it during, well, I'm not sure that we advertise that information. But certainly if they call, it's on the city's website, or they call and we tell them, say, well, what do you got? Well, we got a couch. Well, you put 3 tags on it, put it out with your garbage. We'll pick it up the same day that we picked up your trash. These bottom items are things that you actually have to schedule. We have to send out a special truck for, special truck for a special person. So we charge extra for that service of sending out a truck. For example, 11 tags for any size TV. It could be a small portable. We encourage people to take them themselves to the recycling center where they can pay $15 cash, but they got to spend their gas, they got to spend their time to go out there, make an appointment to get in. Or they can buy 11 tags, which would be $22. That means that they'd have to pay $7 more for the convenience of us coming and pick it up and taking it away for them. When we collect these items, we end up taking it to the hazardous chemical center at the landfill, or we take it to the recycling center wherever it's supposed to go, and they charge us for it. So that's why we have to collect our cost, plus we're trying to pick a nominal fee to charge a nominal fee for our time and effort. Next slide. So, what are the expenditures? Well, we've got our personnel, which is the 400 series. We have 6 full-time and 1 part-time individual. We have contractual services. That is the 500 series. If you look at the budget, you'll see 519. That's our temporary labor force that we hire to help us with our specialty programs, our leaf programs, our citywide cleanup programs. 524 is the landfill tipping fees, which has the household garbage, the trucks going out there on a daily basis dumping. I think that's being bumped from $50 to $51 per ton. Self-hauled brush. As I said, if you had a water bill to show your trash paying customer, you can take it in there within reason. We got a call the other day. Somebody wanted to use one of those like 20-yard roll-off containers, and they wanted to go around and pick up trees and brush and stuff like that. And if I bring that resident's water bill to you, can you take this stuff free of charge? And I said, no, we're not going to do that. Miscellaneous TVs, appliance, and tires. That's also in 524. One of our bigger line items. 524 also contains the recycling services, the pass-through to the Des Moines County Regional Solid Waste Commission's recycling efforts, the Des Moines area recyclers. 529, as in the wastewater, our billing services are handled by the waterworks, and that's a portion of, that also appears in this budget. I believe this figure is half of what is in the wastewater figure. In other words, 1/3 is paid by solid waste and 2/3, I believe, is paid by wastewater. There's a line item for commodities, which would be the 600, and then there's the capital outlay, which usually are the trucks for the most part. Eric? In this fiscal year, we have $187,355 in there for a new truck packer. Last year, somebody said, well, how big's your fleet? We have 7. The oldest one is 18 years old currently. The newest one we took just less than a year ago. The average age is 6.5 years of the fleet. The median age is 9 years. If you replace a truck every 2 years, which is what we are trying to do, we're talking about the truck being 14 years when we get old, when we get rid of it.
And you got stalled a couple of years ago.
Right.
We took one out.
Put a stop to it to give us some breathing room, and now we're trying to be back on schedule.
At that point, I think our solid waste was 400,000 in the hole, and now we have the funds on hand that we can cash flow these.
Okay, that was my question. We're not bonding for garbage
Correct.
trucks. Okay.
And I think that's all I have to say.
All right. You guys have any questions or any other
I
comments?
heard a beep.
Don, is there a way to collect oils and greases, and is there a market for that? If it were,
Well, I know that there's, I mean, during steamboat days, you see down there on the riverfront, they've got these black metal self-contained containers in which they're collecting greases, I think cooking oils probably, and food grease gets poured in there, and then service comes from someplace. I think there's one in Illinois. I don't know where it would be in Iowa. But there are outfits that do that. I think there's some restaurants in the downtown area that have one sitting outside their facility all the time. And so there's evidently, I mean, they have to, I assume they're paying to get it picked up and taken away. I wouldn't think that the value would pay for the service. But there are wastewater facilities that do things to encourage grease, again, food-grade grease and cooking oils to be brought directly to the plant or be brought into the plant because it's a type of material that's more easily digested by an anaerobic digester. And, of course, the byproduct of that digestion process is gas, most of it being methane. And we use that methane gas at the plant, and that's why the energy costs went down, is instead of using a lot of motors and a lot of blowers to treat the digestion process, we're using heat. And we take the gas that's generated by that anaerobic process, put it through a special boiler that causes heats a hot water loop, and that hot water loop circulates around the tank and maintains the contents of an 850,000 gallon tank at 95 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, winter or summer. And that's what that has to be in order for that biological process to carry out that digestion process. We have a big candlestick down there, like some landfills do, that the gas that you can't use, you have to do something with it, and we burn it off. Some people think that that's a sin to do that, but it costs money to pay for the hardware to run an engine, to turn a generator, to make the electricity that you could generate using any excess gas. But the cost for that hardware and the upkeep would drive the electric that we would be making to be 3 to 4 times more expensive than what we pay for Alliance. So it wouldn't make any sense. Large facilities who have a captured supply of grease and oil have invested in that technology and are on the positive side. So, I mean, the amount of gas they're producing is paying to make electricity, and they're getting it cheaper. Or they're using the gas for running this and that or the other, or selling the gas to a facility across the road. Some communities do that. But we're not generating near enough gas to do that. So we do have a heat exchanger, and we do rob heat off the hot water loop that heats the digester, and we rob some of that excess heat and we put it in the hot water loop that goes throughout the plant to heat the buildings. And that loop is typically heated with natural gas boilers. So any heat we are able to reclaim during the winter from the digester process, and we put it in that hot water loop for the buildings, that means we use less natural gas. So I did have that incorporated in the project. But generating electricity, we just can't do it.
What I'm trying to actually get to is.
Pardon me.
That's all right. That's what I wanted you to say. There are a lot of places in this town that are finding it very difficult to get somebody to remove the grease from their grease traps because they don't have an option for getting rid of that grease.
We do allow grease interceptors, septic hauler, 2,500 gallon tank pump truck. He'll go out and he'll pump out a restaurant. And we have a few restaurants within the community who bring that grease to us. They pay a hefty fee to bring that to us. It's a much stronger waste than septage. Yes, it could help our digester, but we do not have an unloading facility associated with our digester, which that would be very expensive to put one in. That's what most facilities that use and encourage grease to be brought to them have, is a direct pumping station just outside the digester that bypasses all the treatment processes. When we set up to accept septage and grease trap, the dumping spot is just upstream of the lift station closest to the plant. It's called South Street. And it's got to go through that lift station's wet wells, it's got to go through the grinders, it's got to go through the pumps, it comes to the plant, it's got to go through screens. It goes through several processes before it actually eventually will get to the digester. And all those steps cost money, and it will follow up the screens. They're very, very small openings on the screens, and so we have to hot water, blast them, and clean them on a regular basis when we get grease traps. So we charge a sizable fee for accepting grease trap waste, more than most of the restaurants, I'm sure, would be willing to pay. So we charge the cost.
Excellent information, because I don't know what to tell people, and that's, you explained that very, very well. It's great information.
Some wastewater plants subsidize, I'm sure,
They actually pay
specific
the
niches
haulers.
of customers.
Yeah.
They pay the
And
haulers.
we used to do that in that we used to take that material free of charge. And until I started looking at it more carefully, we did a lot of sampling and testing in the early 90s, 91, 92, and we developed a chart to say, well, this is what it's costing us to treat this material. And of course, septage is one category, and you'll be brought a resolution to upgrade those fees that they're paying right now once the budget is done. And we'll raise them by 3% by what the fees have been raised by, or will. We're proposing to raise them by 3%. And we used to get a lot of grease interceptors. Now we get just a handful in a year's time. We used to get a lot of septage systems, septic tanks. We don't get very many. And it's because the people have to pay to unload that material here. And they pay a lot more than what they can pay at another wastewater facility. So a lot of this stuff goes elsewhere, which I'm happy with because it just causes us problems with our equipment.
As we progress in upgrading the plant in the future,
Yeah.
if we keep that in mind,
Sure.
that those problems exist, and that they're and that those are tax-paying
Well-
citizens that we need to.
Well, I'm surprised we're not having as few as grease interceptor wastes that we're seeing at the city. I don't know where they're going because I know Fort Madison won't take it. I'm not sure Keokuk might, but there aren't any places close by, wastewater plant-wise. Mount Pleasant doesn't take, I don't even think they take septage. So I don't know where they're going. But to my knowledge, the sewer crews have not had major plug sewers, which have been a problem periodically in Burlington, but it's far and in between, very infrequent. And since we're not seeing the grease, I don't know where it's going.
It's going to Illinois, I can tell you that. I don't know where at in Illinois, but it's, none of the haulers around here are hauling it. They've turned it over to foreigners.
What else? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate you taking up the time that you did.
Dave?
It made it easier for me.
5:30.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
The information in your packet, I know at 5:30 after 2 hours, you don't want to go through more, but just kind of do an overview of what had been in the packet too. There's some comparison charts that are in there. A couple of these you've seen in the past. The first two are right out of the Department of Management website for taxable value and tax levies for the different communities. There's two of them that are in there, one for all Iowa communities over a population of 20,000, and the second one for just the communities between 20 and 30,000, which tends to be what we typically do comparisons against. But just to give you an idea, on a couple of items on that, like that first sheet with all the communities over 20,000, average tax levy, $14.89. This last, or the current fiscal year that we're in, with ours at $15.94, which is the same that we're proposing for this next year. So we're about $1 higher. And if you want to look at an item that where you can directly relate that to, it's our debt service levy. We're at $3.80 and the average is $2.91. So, and something that I have different on here, that what was on last year, that tax collections on a per person basis. If you look at what we collect tax-wise on a per person basis in our community, we're at $423.53. The average community is collecting $563 per person. The way our tax rate may be higher, but because our valuation is so much lower than other communities, as you look the per capita valuation, we're we're third lowest out of the 20.
That's interesting.
22 cities. We just cannot physically, through the property tax system, collect the same that other people do.
But look at the tax rate of the two that are lower than us. I mean, it's just amazing how much difference, how much more their tax rate is.
Yeah.
But basically you're saying
We're challenged in a way that other communities our size aren't, just because of that valuation basis. And really, if you look at where the lowest valuation communities are on a per capita basis, it's the communities between 20 and 30,000. They're all the communities that are not attached to a metro area. If you look at them, almost all of them are communities that are either flatlined or shrinking a little bit, similar to what we see. And they just haven't had a lot of growth occurring. And it's just you see a lot of places that people want to be either in a larger community or to be in a smaller community. We're in that size of an area that just is really difficult to maintain services. And the second sheet, if you look at our subset, the 20 to 30,000 population, our tax rate is below the average. That's when people though are comparing. I mean, that's not who people compare us to in the public. The general public's going to compare our tax rate to West Burlington or Danville. But we do have a set of issues that we have to deal with, just based on our population size, that makes it pretty difficult to try to be competitive or comparable to them when it comes to those issues. Not that we don't still have to deal with it and be cognizant of it, but there are things that impact us. And when you look at that subset, our tax levy, our debt service levy, again, still stays up a little bit higher than the average. And our tax on a per capita basis is still well below the average. There was another survey that was done, I think this was by City of Marion, so that this information doesn't come from the budget documents. It comes from HR, finance departments, so it's pretty close, but it's not necessary. Everybody measures things or considers things a little bit differently, so you got to take it a little bit with a grain of salt. But if you look on here, the personnel comparison for when they were doing the study, they were looking at communities 20 to 60,000, and it's understandable given their population at 36 or so. The employees per thousand were right on the average for those communities. The percentage, though, that are in fire and police were on the upper end of that. And that falls under the police officers per thousand were on the upper end, and the firefighters were on the upper end. If you notice where the firefighters are in the upper end, all the communities that are on the upper end operate ambulance services. I mean, that's kind of what the driver is on that. So that's where you have to know context a little bit, or understand context too. Debt comparisons on the next sheet. Not surprising if our debt levy is higher than other communities, that this might be. Our average debt per capita or per person is higher. But actually, our debt that's funded by GO debt property tax askings is pretty comparable. It's the same. If you look at those numbers, the difference in our average versus the other communities is TIF abated debt. We have a higher TIF abated debt than what other communities do. And I think that you can kind of relate that back to, we had a very large project that really has driven what's happened with our TIF debt over time, over the last 5 years anyway, 6, 8 years. Our average TIF debt, or that, I don't know what I'm trying to get at. I guess I'm reading that a little bit wrong. Our average debt is still higher. It's just not as much higher. It's elevated. Our tax askings are not necessarily driven as much by this part, the debt per person, as it is by the backloading that has gone on with our debt. The bond issues that occurred in 2011, and then when we had to finance $4.5 million worth of deficit accounts in 2012, put us into a spot where we have an elevated property tax asking, and that has to work through the system over the course of the next few years.
Backloaded debt.
There's another comparison here. These are out of the state forms for the communities between 20 and 30,000 for the current year. You can compare us to the other communities: Marshalltown, Muscatine, Mason City, Fort Dodge, Clinton, and Ottumwa. A couple of things that I'd point out on here. You can look at where, for example, our emergency services or public safety, we're on the higher end of expenditures there. Our library is one that's been talked about, and we have talked about in the past, is on a little bit on the higher end there. Well, it is the higher end there. Our community center, we are way higher on that. And on the second page of that, there's another category under general government near the top, the last line item there, other general government. We only have 50,000 in there. You can take a look at Mason City. They're showing 4.6 million. Well, there's a reason. It's because people report numbers differently. We have all of our health and insurance costs allocated out to the departments, and you'll have another community, say Mason City, that's got it all here under this general government category. So as you look at what the expenditures are that are listed between these, it's nice to be able to take a look and see where we stack up, but you also have to take it with a grain of salt, because people count and code their expenditures differently. You can see that with how garbage is done. Marshalltown codes their garbage there under Public Works in the general fund. We code ours as a separate revenue item outside of the general fund. It's an enterprise fund. So making comparisons between communities is very difficult. Down under, even under business type activities, you can look at, it shows our sewer expenditures at 3.3 million. If you were to total up what Don had in his presentation, that it's higher than that. that 3.3 million doesn't count transfers out of the sewer fund to the general fund, to the debt service fund. That number, or those numbers are down below, it listed as a transfer out. You also have their revenue, all their revenue bonds totals, I think, 1.7 million, just shy of that. It's listed down there below. So in every community sees some of those things not necessarily be reported the same way too. So you just have to be really careful about how you use this information. It's a nice reference point, but anytime you start doing comparisons between communities, no one does things the same.
I know you have plenty to do, but you know what, I would love to have that information that you just kind of walked us through on a piece of paper sometime, just as a point of.
I can have a narrative that goes with that for you.
Yeah, that's what I mean, and that would be really, really helpful.
Sure. And, just, you do have also in here the gross general fund revenues, these last three sheets that were in there. Then it actually goes across 2 pages. Gross general fund expenditures goes across 2 pages, and then a net. About the only thing I really kind of wanted to point out, just the gross general fund expenditure sheets. We tonight got to see the police department, their different departments he discussed. You have the line item detail in front of you. Hopefully you don't get too caught in the weeds on the line item detail, because it's just an awful lot of accounts that we have. But it has percentages down in the proposed budget column. Like, say, for example, with the fire department at $4,861,000 for total expenditures. That's just shy of 25% of our general funds costs. Police department's at 28%, development at 4%, culture and rec at 17%, human services is very little, might as well be 0. Public works is about 12%, general administrative at 8%, and then the transfers is about 6% of expenditures. Again, you can do statewide comparisons. Public safety on an average community across the whole state is in the 44% range. We're at 53%. So we spend more on public safety than the average community does. Development department, statewide average is 4%. We're right on. Culture and rec, statewide average is 20%. We're at 17%. We spend a little bit less on culture and rec. Public works is at 12%, or is 11% statewide, and we're at 12%. General administrative, I don't have these written here, so I'm just kind of going off memory. General administrative, I think, comes out at 12%, and we're at 8%. And transfers on a statewide average is 6%. And the average community, I just skipped over the human services, it's less than 1%. So seeing us at a minuscule amount, that's pretty typical for communities. One of the things where we're skewed is towards public safety, but if you were to look at communities our size, I think that you'd find that we're not as skewed as what that number reflects. The smaller communities across the state tend to spend less money on public safety. Our sector, our size community has the highest percentage that goes towards public safety, just by the nature of, you have to have larger departments. For example, well, for one, smaller communities just don't typically have paid fire departments. So that skews that percentage down when you get up to the larger size communities. We're into the size community where you have, all the communities have full service fire departments at our size, but you don't have enough population base to spread it across. So ours tends to, that public safety area is one that just ends up being the highest. And I think that's a very quick go-through on that. It's not designed to, if you have questions about what's in here, please let me know. I guess one other thing I'd just say, the general fund expenditures net of grants fees, I want you to see what the different departments cost after the revenues they collect. So you can use that to take a look. An example, the ambulance department, as a subset of fire, is still a couple of $100,000, much less than the $1.2 million of gross expenditures, because they're collecting $1 million of revenues. So to get an idea, that sheet helps to understand when you think about the property taxes that are collected, this is how it essentially is being divided out for services. Out of a given $100 that's collected for property taxes, well, absent debt service, what goes into the general fund, $27 of it's going to fund fire, $33 is going to fund police, et cetera.
And that's where we should be spending our money. As far as
Well,
I'm
and
concerned.
as you look at it, we spend close to, when you talk about a budget, the general fund is what's primarily what property taxes cover, and 60% of it is emergency services.
Right.
And out of that, 80% is personnel. You end up losing a lot of flexibility if you're trying to make sure that you maintain those key services. And that's about it for what I had. I know, Jim, you asked to have the goals from this last year put in the council packet as well, and I think it does make sense to take a look at what did we have as highlighted for goals for this upcoming session. A couple of the things that are on our CIP, a new police facility, doing something with Apollo School come directly out of that. We still are also, the first ongoing goal that's on there talks about eliminating deficit accounts and getting an adequate cash balance on hand. This budget is designed to try to continue our process towards making that happen.
And that's why I wanted that up, so I
Yeah.
can keep everything in mind of what we're
Yep.
shooting for.
Yeah, don't lose track of that.
Yeah.
So,
And don't forget Cascade Bridge, excuse me.
there's a couple of you, I think, that have that on. That's one, as you start talking about where's our flexibility to fund that. Well, anytime you want to do an increase in taxes, you can afford to do that, but
What?
Yeah.
that's you making a choice to do it. When can you fit it in more likely, where you incorporate it within what we're spending now? You're probably more out in the 2023, 2024 time.
Save your breath, Philip.
Oh,
I did want to give, one, go ahead and spread them out.
Oh, I don't know.
It's just one sheet.
you got yours.
Yeah.
One of the concerns that I know that the goal is to how much of our legal debt margin are we using? This goes, the right-hand column is 2012, the left hand is 2020, based off of our CIP that we're working on. How much of our debt capacity are we using? Back in 2012, we were at 80%. As we ended 2015, we were at 66% used. The current year, funding the primarily street work and the purchase of an ambulance there, I think that's pretty much what we have listed for the FY 2017 that would be borrowing in 2016, because we borrow in the spring. Factoring that in, we should be below 60% of our debt capacity used. And what I have highlighted in yellow there looks at our 5-year CIP. It also looks at the 2 flood mitigation projects that we plan on bringing on. And as we talk about the TIF projects, that the agency street projects especially, is that $2 million will help cover. We never, doing the work that we have, that we plan on doing, we never violate that 70% usage. In fact, the highest that we should be seeing is this next year when we get back up to 66.
This is good.
And that's kind of what let you know that as we bring forward information about a 5-year CIP and what we're funding, not just this next year, but what we're looking at over the next few years, that we're staying within that.
Awesome,
That's good.
awesome. Anybody else have anything before we close out then?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Annette.
You have a lot to be thankful for.
Amen.
Yeah.